What's up YouTube, Solidus here, and today's video is going to be looking at one of the new bosses in the new raid that is coming out in patch 8.2, Azharas Eternal Palace. And this is one of the first bosses that we tested last night, which was the Court of Azshara boss. It is a 2-boss raid, quite similar to the Restless Cabal in the Crucible of Storms in some respect. And overall, straight from the off, I'll tell you that this, for me at least, was quite an enjoyable fight. Now, it's worth noting that all of the footage that you're watching here is done in a pickup group with no voice comms. So we literally just went in, a group of raiders that we got from the group finder tool on the PTR, and just went in fairly blind, read through the dungeon journal to work out what it was that we needed to do. So just bear that in mind as you're watching some of this footage. That being said, this boss, in the current condition that it's in, I think it is absolutely doable in a guild raid group with voice comms. Because the thing that was killing us the most on this fight was the mechanics, of which there are quite a number of. So I'll go through as many that I can remember. As playing a tank, there weren't very many mechanics that you had to remember on this boss specifically. But for the rest of the DPS and the healers, there are a number of mechanics that you need to be aware of. So it is a 2-boss fight, and like I said, it's similar to the Restless Cabal in the fact that you need to kill them both roughly at the same time. As soon as one of them gets down to 1 HP, they will start to cast a spell, and if that cast goes off, they will recover 50% of their HP, unless the other boss gets to 1 HP, at which point the cast will be interrupted and they will both die. In terms of tanking, what we typically kept on doing and was working fairly well for us was we were tanking them where they stood. And then what you need to do is you need to switch before you reach 10 stacks of the debuff that they apply to you. If you get 10 stacks, then you will be mind controlled and it will be a wipe. So what you need to do is switch, just like you saw there. Roughly every 7 stacks is where we felt most comfortable. And what we did was we just left the bosses where they were and switched the tank position. We were using a Brewmaster Monk, which was me, and a Demon Hunter tank, so the mobility was fairly high and we could do that fairly quickly. You need to make sure that the bosses are 21 yards apart at least, otherwise they will get a bubble applied to them and they will take 1% damage of what's been applied to them. So obviously you need to keep spread out in terms of the bosses' locations as far as possible, and just make sure that your DPS try and keep them evenly, like the health coming down as evenly as possible. And the first couple of goes we weren't bothering with that, we were just focusing on this one. You can see here silvers, but in the end we were just splitting DPS and it was working. So the reason why we kept failing on this is probably because of the amount of mechanics that were in there, and there might be a little fine-tuning of numbers for some of the abilities that go off. But overall, from a tank's perspective, I felt that it was doable. We get it, the last pull, I think we get both bosses down to around 50% with multiple people dead. So in a full guild raid group with voice comms, I do think that this is doable. So other mechanics then that you will see throughout the fight is, as you can see now on the right hand side of the screen, there are a number of ads spawning. There's one of them just on the screen there. It is called a Potent Spark, and you need to kill the potent sparks throughout the fight, and once they go off they will do a considerable amount of raid damage. Now, you will also get a debuff applied to you, which leaves a 5-second debuff on you, which increases the amount of damage that the Potent Spark does to the raid. So you need to stagger the Potent Sparks being nuked throughout the fight. Kill them one by one, wait 5 seconds, kill the next one. A couple more mechanics that go on throughout this fight is the boss that you can see here, Silvaz the Zealous. He will target somebody for a charge mechanic, and when he gets there, there's around 300,000 damage being done, and that will be split amongst everybody that is at that location. So you need to stack the raid on the person which was targeted by the charge. He will also do a move called Zealous Eruption, which is what he is doing now, and that will send out tremors across the raid group, and you need to be stacked on top of the boss at that point to reduce the amount of damage taken. And as you can see, I typically found that as a tank, I could just stand far enough away and it wouldn't actually hurt me enough to warrant me moving in. And like I said, if you do move in, then the bosses will take less damage as it is. The other thing that you need to know throughout this fight is Queen Azhara is stood watching this fight the entire time that it is going on, and throughout the fight she will enact decrees which have a number of different mechanics that you need to be aware of. Some of them are quite fun, some of them quite annoying. One of which is something called form ranks, and what she will do is she will mark locations on the floor, and everybody needs to go and run and stand in those locations. Otherwise, you will take damage and obviously unnecessarily healing throughout the raid. There is that one thing I will say about that is the locations are very hard to see, in my opinion. So I think Blizzard needs to look at how they mark those locations a bit more clearly. We did have people dying to that. Another one that she does is a debuff, and she applies a debuff to you, which means that you cannot do an ability twice in a row. So if you do, you will take damage. So you just need to make sure that throughout your rotation, you don't repeat the same ability. You have other abilities on there where if you stand still, then you will build up charge, which build up this damage. And then once the debuff expires, it will release that damage. And obviously, if you haven't moved at all, it is probably going to one-shot you. So you do need to make movements, small movements throughout to do that. So overall, as you can see, there are quite a number of mechanics to get used to. I really enjoyed this fight, especially from a tank's perspective. Whilst it wasn't overly difficult, the tank swap mechanic did make you think about it a little bit more. And you do need to save your cooldowns and rotate them quite wisely. I found that the other boss, the caster boss on the left-hand side of the screen now, she typically did more damage. So I found that I would save my cooldowns for that point, or for when the potent sparks were about to die. Because that's when the biggest amount of damage was coming out. You can also see on the floor that there are little fissures. They are left there from Silivaz's feature that he does, one of his mechanics, and you need to make sure that either he is not standing in it or nobody in the raid is standing in it. You probably want to try and find out a better way of doing the charge ability, because once he charges to a location, that's when he starts to leave them on the floor. So what we were thinking about doing is having people stand on the outside of the room, because it is a fairly small room, a circular room that you're in, with Queen Azhara standing above you. Then you can, but it just means people have to move a lot more to stack on the right person and so on. So I think a couple more tries to this to fine tune some of the mechanics and how you handle them. But like I said, if we had comms and if we were in a full guild group, I think this boss would be quite easily doable. I think this is about the 4th boss in the raid encounter. But like, it was enjoyable. I enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll agree too. And it is one thing that I do think that Battle for Azeroth is doing really well is the raid bosses. I think in the main have all been enjoyable. I mean, Jaina for me has been the best end boss in a raid that I've done personally. I've also really enjoyed Unat. That's been quite fun. I haven't done Mythic or tried Mythic yet, but when I've been watching the streams, that looked really fun to do. So I do think they've been getting the raid bosses right, and the next 2 bosses, which I am going to do a video on very soon, should be out today, follow in the same suit, except for the underwater boss, which I will do a video on very soon. We got to try that. I'll save commentary for that video, but for me, this and the second boss that we got to test were the most enjoyable out of the raid testing. So there you go. That is a quick overview of the Azhara's Court, the 4th raid boss in Azharas Eternal Palace. Hopefully, once this becomes live and I can get a full tanking guide done on how to down this boss on Heroic, then that will be out very, very soon. But thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then please feel free to leave a comment or a like. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, then please feel free to do so. And I will catch you in the next one. Thank you very much.